And so he says that some distinguish miracles from other sorts of unique events by making them a unique kind of event. There you go. So in
Hmm.
history, there are unique events, and so history can study unique events. But miracles are different. They're unique kinds of events. And so that's a little bit different, he says, right? He says that that is, miracles belong to a category that differs too much from normal experience to ever be deemed probable, right?
They're the ones I don't want to deal with, so I'm going to put them in that box and not.
That's right. That's right. But he tells us that this approach, which is not shared by all historiographers, again, simply begs the question of whether human experience includes any miracles, right? To argue that a supernaturally caused event can have no analogies, one must presuppose that no other supernaturally caused events have ever occurred. And of course, this constitutes a circular argument,
Right.
right? Yeah.
Right. So does the historical text exclude discussion of superhuman causes or not? To a great extent, this question is semantic. Words have socially agreed meanings, so we define them in a matter of choice within a community. If the Academy chooses to define history in such a way to exclude such causes, however, we must recognize that we have not made the question illegitimate. We have simply circumscribed the epistemic sphere within which our particular discipline works. So we've carved it out, right? So you're making Christmas cookies, and you haven't put flour on that one part, and so you're sectioning it off as the non-flour part. You don't want to deal with it because you've already rolled out your dough, and you're going to put your cookie cutters out there. But that's outside the realm of cookie making discussion. All of this part is cookie making discussion. Now, those things seem like these things, but I just don't want to deal with it. So we're just excluding it for the purpose of, because I don't want to do the thing that would make me have to work and maybe change my ideas on how to make cookies. So we may choose or not to define such questions as part of history, but we have not thereby made them improper objects of academic inquiry. People are still going to ask those questions, even if it seems weird. And so, this is something that we should embrace as we're not really dealing with the fact if we just dismiss it, right? That's the thing. You may not say, well, this didn't happen, or it seems like these two different stories contradict each other, or we have independent witnesses that have witnessed something else. So those are explanations to just the story, which is the good part. We want the stories. That's what history does. Bring us the story, and then step two is then to help us to distinguish what stories are true or what are fabrications after the fact, what billed as old wives' tales, or what existed at the time most favorable to all the evidence. So that's what's being asked. So just to ignore it and say, well, these are a different kind of things, doesn't really get over that question that he's making this case for.
And he says these boundaries themselves reflect a particular line of historical development, namely a particular Western Enlightenment tradition in history's discipline. He says there's no transcultural or transhistorical assent to these boundaries, and some disciplines have already moved beyond these boundaries, right? So we don't have to be stuck with, well, I'm not going to look at that because I'm not going to call that history kind of thing. But wait a minute, right? It's history. Look at all of it, right? He says we cannot appeal to some cosmic rules of our discipline to prevent exploration of these issues. Those rules evolved in a particular historical context, and as the guild, we are allowed to rethink and revise them if they are needed, right? So, we cannot blame the discipline, he tells us, that we have inherited. He says we are responsible, that is, historians are responsible for what they do with this inheritance. Freedom to re-engage old questions from new perspectives is part of what it means to think critically. And so historians can look at, in fact, should, he's suggesting, look at these kinds of issues.
Right. This kind of reminds me a little bit of, it'd be the opposite of history, but prehistory or future history with the Minority Report. So, but different from the book, but I'm talking about the movie here with Tom Cruise. He's always running, and it's a really good movie, but they convict people based on future crimes, and they stop somebody from, most of the time it's murder or some big event. And so they say, because we were able to see it and catch you pretty much within the commission of a certain amount of time, we're convicting you based on what you would do in the future. Well, then Tom Cruise's character sees something that says, well, it does seem like we're looking at it like this, but here's an instance involving him, and that's the whole plot of the story, where this is not the case. And so they're taking in new information saying, well, now we got to look at everything all over again to see if we're missing part of the piece of the story here, and we're missing the second shooter or something along those lines that he sees in the mirror of the plot for this story. And so to just say, well, it's too complicated, or that complicates the situation here. Well, right, but we're wanting the true picture, right? We're wanting to believe all the true things that are available to us in history. And so when these events come along, to just dismiss it out of hand and tell it to go sit in the corner doesn't really deal with it, other than just devalues your kind of your entire pedagogy there for communicating to us what happened in history. So look at that. Got a sci-fi reference in there at least once. All right. Well, however we define the rules of the discipline, historiography no more excludes the possibility of knowledge outside its conventional methods than historians would grant that physics does. Historians who choose to ask the questions may ask them with the same academic rigor employed with inferring human causation in events where such causation is debated. Right. So you have those things of we were talking about it just the other day of what caused the Civil War. What was it? Firing on Fort Sumter, or was it telling the South that they couldn't secede from the Union? Well, what's the cause of the war there? You talking immediate? You talking philosophical? Which one came first there? That's the chicken and the egg for the Civil War there. And so we're employing kind of a multi-level question there that allows, and you almost encourage that secondary discipline. But if you're just talking about, well, all of a sudden the South fired on Fort Sumter and a war broke out, well, to just dismiss everything with the founding of the Constitution, the 1776, and all those questions tends to limit your explanation of what actually might be an initial cause to the thing that you're wanting the full explanation for.
Right. So the scientists might say, well, the physical event of bullets firing caused the war. Somebody else says, no. The linguistic social context of what was going on caused the war. Right. Why can't cause the start of the war? Why can't both kind of be, in different levels and in different ways, an explanation of what caused the war?
Right. Exactly. Right. Well, in a postmodern context, for better or for worse, or some of each, historiography's rules are shifting. So that's what we have to deal with.
Yeah.